I'll use my lunch money to buy books. I would literally starve just so I could buy a novel. I think from childhood, I just realized the importance of storytelling. It actually was one of the reasons I started Tribes and History because when I was probably around 10, 11, I realized that the comics that I was reading, there were no Black people. I wouldn't see any Black people in those comics. I used to read a lot of Archie comics. I used to read a lot of Babysitter's books, Goosebumps, all of those books, and I never really saw a representation of myself, but in the comics and the animation. That was how the idea of Tribes and History first dropped in me. But I would say storytelling is something that I have always known was important, even as a child.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Unmuted Moments, the podcast for young professionals exploring the journey of finding and owning your voice. Today's guest is someone who has built a career around using her voice to tell stories that matter. I'm thrilled to be talking with Nmasi Chukwuemeka. She's a full-time entrepreneur, a digital creator, a writer, and a founder of two businesses, Mazzy Brand and Tribes and History. Mazzy Brand is a digital branding platform, while Tribes and History is a digital African storytelling platform. On today's episode, we'll talk about her journey, moving from Nigeria to the States for college, finding her voice along the way, and learning how to bet on herself while building businesses that make an impact. Also, dive into overcoming self-doubt, staying authentic, and the mindset that has helped her to succeed. So, Mazzy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ahi.
So, how are you doing today?
Doing amazing. Thank you.
So, thank you for taking the time today to chat with me. We haven't met before today, but I must say, just researching your background, I think it's amazing. I saw that you started your first brand while in college, Daily Chronicles.
Oh, yes. I started Daily Chronicles when I was in college. Yes. I had that for a little while, but I think just a lot of things navigating college, I paused on it and I still haven't been able to go back to it. But yes, that was when I started my first brand.
Awesome. So, I guess let's start from the very beginning. So, growing up, can you describe for the listeners what growing up was like for you? And did you feel comfortable using your voice then? Or was that something you had to build over time?
Growing up, I grew up in Nigeria. I grew up in Southeast Nigeria. I grew up in a very loving home. I am the last child of five kids. Using my voice was something I was comfortable with growing up. I didn't grow up in an environment where I wasn't maybe allowed to talk or express myself. I'm very close to my family. We're a very tight family. So growing up, using my voice was something that I was comfortable doing. It wasn't really something that I had to build over time, even though there are some other skills surrounding that I've had to build over time.
That's awesome. So, you were the last of five. Did I hear you?
Yes, I am the baby of the house.
I am the first of four. And it's interesting because when I think about finding divorce, for me in particular, I think a big part of it is the immigrant journey or the cultural aspect to it. Because now I have two kids and seeing how like we raised them compared to how we were raised, it's a world of difference. And I remember growing up, right, as a child, like you had to listen to your parents. You can't talk back to your parents. Whatever your elders or your parents said to you was final. No, and I always thought that was part of why I was more of the inward or quiet side. It was more cultural to the thing, just the kind of environment I grew up in. So it's interesting how even I guess for you, you were the last five. It was a little different. So I guess how was that dynamic with your older siblings growing up? Did you have to fight for like for yourself to get stuff? How was that like?
Oh, okay. So, yes, I understand what you mean. The cultural aspect where you have to keep quiet where your elders are talking. And I think that's something that is ingrained in our society as Africans. However, for me, I think one of the things was like I said, I'm the last of five kids. My parents were done having kids. So by the time they had me, they were like done, they were tired, they were over it. So I guess that gave me more leeway because one thing I can say, whenever I say this, everyone is so surprised. I can say I can count the number of times my mom pained me. I think only probably three times in my whole life. No.
That's interesting. For
Yeah.
Nigerian child, I should say. Nigerian child.
Yeah. A lot of people find that they're like, wait, what do you mean? They never came you? I'm like, yeah, my mom, she just let me be who I was. But I think it's also from the fact of after training 4 kids, you thought you were done. And then out comes this amazing child, I must add. She gave me a lot of leeway. And then my siblings, too. My siblings, my brothers, are my heroes. They are absolutely amazing. And they taught me a lot of the things that I know. So with them, being adults, I feel like I just learned a lot of things from them. Even right now, people actually say, like, my brother's wife was talking about it the other day. She was like, you do everything your brother does.
So I imagine your siblings was a sort of good example for you to take
Yes.
after. So storytelling's obviously a big part of what you do now with your businesses and your platform.
Yeah.
So at what point did you realize how important that was, or that's a power that's worth developing?
I think ever since I was a kid, I always knew storytelling was a big deal. I got my first storybook slash novels when I was 5. My mom bought those books for me. Um, Ngozi and Hassan and The Wicked King. Those two books, I don't forget them. They were by Lantern Publishing Company
Publishing.
then. Yes. And I think that was what helped me. That was what shaped me into loving to write, into loving to read stories, because after that, everything about me was reading. I would use my lunch money to buy books.
You're one of those kids, huh? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll use my lunch money to buy books. I would literally starve just so I could buy a novel. So I think from childhood, I just realized the importance of storytelling. It actually was one of the reasons I started Tribes and History, because when I was probably around 10, 11, I realized that the comics that I was reading, there were no Black people. I wouldn't see any Black people in those comics. I used to read a lot of Archie comics. I used to read a lot of babysitters books, Goosebumps, all of those books, and I never really saw a representation of myself, but in the comics and the animation. That was how the idea of Tribes and History first dropped in me. But our storytelling is something that I have always known was important, even as a child.
That's awesome. So let's fast forward to you grew up in Nigeria, did high school in Nigeria, and then moving to college in the States. How was that transition like?
I would say maybe the first year and a half, almost 2 years, was tough because, first of all, I grew up in the city, so I'm a city girl. So, wherever I wanted to go, I could go in Nigeria. Now, moving over to Kentucky, which is where I schooled, which is the countryside, that was very hard. I'm not even sure I can describe how hard that was for me, because I felt like I couldn't move. I felt like I couldn't. You want to go to Walmart, you have to get a ride. You want to go to the mall, you have to get a ride. That was I don't think people understand or realize how hard that can be. That was a very tough transition for me. And it wasn't just that, dude. It was also just being away from family, because as at then, my family was still in Nigeria. So being away from family also was very hard because, again, remember I told you I am the last of 5 kids. I was pampered, but I turned out great. Look at me. Just not being able to see my family or being able to cry to my mom or ask my brother for money and stuff like that. It was very hard. So it was also the transition of going from being a teenager to like slowly being a young adult. All of these things was happening at once. I am in a country where I, my immediate family, of course, like my extended family is here, but my immediate family at that time wasn't here. So it was very tough for maybe a year and a half. But then one thing America teaches you is there is nobody coming to save you.
It just reminds me of my own journey. I remember, I guess, very stereotypically, I got on the plane, living in Nigeria, thinking I was coming to America. So I was expecting like a New York type place, like big buildings,
Yeah.
cabs, lots of cars,
Yep.
shops, and all that stuff. And then we got off the plane in Lexington, Kentucky. And
Yes.
then on that drive on I-75 south to Brea,
Yep.
Kentucky, I'm like, what is going on?
Yeah.
This is very different. And I think it just reminds me of the whole like danger of a single story type of thing,
From there.
where to which my mother, yeah, her famous talk, a famous TED talk. For listeners who don't know what we're talking about, just go Google "danger of a single story," Chimamanda. But anyways, it was very different from what I hard. So I think that's part of why, I guess for me at least, why that transition was hard. Because I guess if you expected it to be like that, maybe mentally, psychologically, you prepare yourself for a place like that. But in my head, I've had one image and then it showed up and it was completely different. And I remember you talked about trying to get around and how difficult that was. I remember I had to get a bicycle. So that's how I would get from campus to go buy stuff in Walmart, for example. So for me, at least in my journey, part of what made the transition, as far as it relates to voice, hard was my accent. I was very conscious of it. Like whenever people would ask me to repeat myself, for example, like I just didn't like it. And not because the people may not have any bad intentions or any ill intentions. It just might be they just did not hear what I had to say. But whenever you tell me to repeat myself, I just felt bad about it. I just felt bad about myself. I thought you were just essentially calling me out that I am different, I am African, that kind of thing. And so it took a while. I don't know if I got out of it in college, maybe towards the end of college. But it took a while to get off that mindset. How was that a thing for you? How did you navigate that journey of the way you sounded or your accent?
It was a little different for me. My accent wasn't really something I was bothered about. But I think also by the time I was in the States, being African had become a little bit cooler than it was before. Afrobeat, Burna
That's right.
Boy.
Oh, those are very good points.
Yeah, so I think for me, my accent wasn't something that was such a big deal for me. But what was a big deal was my name. That was what was a big deal for me because my full name is Masichi and my last name is Chukwuemeka. However, when I introduced myself to a fellow Nigerian who was in a higher class than I was, this was probably the first or the second day of our orientation. So I just landed and I told her, "Hey, my name is Nmasichi." She was like, nobody can pronounce that. Just say your name is Chichi. This was a fellow Nigerian. This wasn't a Nigerian that grew up in the States. This was a Nigerian from Nigeria.
Yeah.
So that made me so self conscious. And you might have, I know you said you researched me and stuff. You might have seen some places maybe where I was called Chichi. That's how Chichi
Ex-
came about.
I see. So is that
And
what you went by in college, Chichi?
that was what I went by in college. And it stopped. And then I think right after college, and shout out to Chimamanda Adichie, that woman is amazing. I follow her life, I read her books, I watch her videos, I watch her speeches. There was one time she was talking about how she would present herself to the world. This was when she was getting ready to publish Hibis
Oh, because that was like way, way back then.
way
Because
back.
that was one of our early ones.
Yes, that was actually her first book. They
Yeah.
published 2003. I read that
Oof.
book when I was 12. Yeah. When the interview that she had, she was talking about how so her name is actually Ngozi Grace, actually, but her mom's name is also Grace. Her name is Ngozi. Now, when she was in Nigeria, she felt Ngozi was very common. So she started answering
Amanda, like the English name Amanda.
the English name Amanda. And then when she moved over to the States, when she moved out to the States, Amanda was common and she was like, "What is this? I don't like Amanda." So she went back to Ngo. But now the thing is, as she was going out to get published, this is her being introduced to the world. She said she kept thinking that night, she doesn't want to go out into the world as Ngozi. But not that she didn't like her name, but she just wanted something very unique. Also, she didn't want Grace because Grace felt more like her mother's name as opposed to her name. So she said she kept thinking there was this Amanda name she was answering, and then she was like, "Wait, I'm Amanda."
Oh.
That was how Chimamanda came about.
So she essentially gave herself Chimamanda.
She gave herself
That
Chimamanda.
wasn't her government name. I did not know the story. I should go look that up. It's like a YouTube video or something.
Yeah, she had I believe there was a YouTube video. Yes, it was like an interview. But anyway, my name, I think it was right after college. I was like, what the heck is Chichi? That is not my name. When
But Chichi is a Nigerian. Like
it
Nigerians go by Chichi, right?
it's
That's a
like,
Nigerian name,
it's not, it
but
wasn't my,
not your name.
if you notice, I also go by Masi. But that's because that was what I had growing up. Everyone called me Masi. So I was fine with that, right? But Chichi, no one ever called me. So the fact that I had to give myself the name Chichi because I was scared that people wouldn't be able to pronounce Masichi.
Masichi.
One day I was just having this introspection and self discovery and thinking to myself, and I was like, nah, no, that's not my name. So now my first name is actually Chineye, not Masichi, but growing up, everyone called me Masichi, so it like overshadowed Chineye. So I was like, okay, what about Chineye? And I'm going by Chineye, but then I'm like, again, like I said, shout out to Chimamanda. That woman is amazing. She just embodies such grace. Like there are just so many qualities that she embodies that I think, should be. She's basically a role model. I was thinking about it and I'm like, I'll go by my full name. My name is Nmasichi Chukwuemeka. And from that day on, I started going by my full name. So a couple of people will call me Chineye because maybe that's when we met in life. A couple of people might call me Masichi because when we met, that was what I was answering. A couple might call me Chichi. Usually,
Berea College?
yes. Usually, if you call me Chichi, I know you knew me from Berea. But most of the people that, I've been talking to ever since, like my friends from college and everything, I just said, hey, just call me Masichi. Masichi is fine. And so back to the question, I didn't really have an accent problem. I feel like I actually liked my accent. I didn't really want to get like an American accent. However, I think if you live here for a long time, it just kind of
Naturally.
gets in without realizing it. But yes, I was fine with my accent. However, my name and my self identity was something that I struggled with while I was in college.
It's interesting. Part of the goal for this podcast is just to highlight a different journey, right? So the big deal for me in my head was just the accent thing. I have very long names too. Like
Yeah.
my last name is not easy to pronounce by any stretch. I go by it's short for Idi Amin. Not a lot of people know my government name, but Idi Amin is my government name. I go by Ahis for short. But I have always had Ahis growing up. That's what they called me at home. So I never had any thoughts about like changing my name for me. So the name was never a thing. I grew up answering to Ahis. I came to the States. I still had the same name. So I've had the same name forever. I haven't had any sort of issues with that. So it's very interesting to just see the different sort of challenges. There's different things that we all within ourselves have to deal
Yeah.
with. And so one immigrant's problem is completely different than next, even from the same country and going to the same college. That's a powerful story. So I guess in the end, after college, is how did the branding your companies play? Did branding your companies play a role in what you ended up with? I know your company now is called one of your companies is called Massive Brand. So is that part of what went into choosing or settling with to go with Mazzy in terms of building that brand or building a company that's named after you?
As I was building my businesses, or rather, as I started building my businesses, I realized I am building a conglomerate.
Hey, all right, all right, all right, all right.
One of the companies under the parent company is Massy Brand. So
Yeah.
I guess that's how the naming of that came about because it's a branding agency and my name is Masichi Masi. So I just called it that.
That's awesome. So I guess we're on topic of your companies now. Can you, for people who are not familiar with your brands or your companies, can you just break it down for us what each of them do and what's your bigger vision for those brands and maybe the bigger conglomerate? What's a bigger vision here?
For Tribes and History, which is so dear to my heart because I feel like I've had this vision more than a decade. Tribes and History is an African storytelling platform and not just telling African stories, but telling these stories through different media formats. So it can be quizzes, through games, through comics, through animations, and not just the telling of the stories, but we also highlight African trailblazers, Africans and people of African descent who are doing amazing in whether it's their career, whether it's their business, whatever path they have chosen in life. We highlight these people and we feature them in something that is called TAFRO features. So that's TAFRO features. And then also in Tribes and History, we also have artists and creators who also put up their books on our platform, not just books, but whatever creations they have on our platform. So Tribes and History is just basically the hub of African storytelling. The goal is to make sure that positive African stories are heard because the thing is, like you mentioned early in the beginning, there is a big danger. There's a danger of a single story. If the only thing or hear about Africa is disease and poverty and death, then that's a single story. There are so many other stories. There is our history, which as Africans, for our history, we're more of oral people. We haven't really written much down. And I think that has to change. We have to ties history. For our history, there's the Dahomey Warriors that has to be told. That's Viola Davis's movie. Those stories have to be told. There are so many amazing. Actually, in Nigeria, I'm trying to remember the name of the town. Men and women speak different languages. There's a town in Nigeria.
What part of Nigeria?
It's either across river somewhere.
How does that even work?
It-
Like,
it-
how do you speak to your kids? So if you're a man and you have a daughter, you speak a different language to your daughter?
well, for the female, I guess the female dialects or the female
Hmm,
language.
that's very, I did not know that. So I just learned something today.
I'm gonna once we're done with this, I'm gonna find the name of the city and send it.
That's amazing.
I'm remembering it, but then it's escaping me. But,
That's fine.
yeah. So these are stories that need to be told. And one thing that Black Panther has shown us is people are hungry for African stories. People are hungry for African heroes, African superheroes. So that is the goal of Tribes and History. And that's the vision we have, and that's what we're currently building. And for massive brands, it's focused more on branding, coaches, who are basically helping them with their brand, helping them find their voice, helping them with the design part of their business, such as building their websites. And so that's what we do at Massive Brands. And the goal is to keep expanding it.
It's awesome. That's very powerful. Especially the tribes in history go, like both of them, but I guess the bigger one, the tribes in history one, about trying to tell those stories. As I was thinking about that, it was like, I'm like, huh, this is danger of a single story thing. It's like it could be flipped, right? On the African side of things, and most of the stories people know is like children hungry in Congo, or there's a war, so donates this amount to help kids hungry. But then, like we said initially, our perception of America is like the flip side of it too, right? It just occurred to me, like the image people have about Africa is this one image. Obviously, there are more to. There's more besides that. And then for America, because of the movies and all the stuff we see, the music videos and all that stuff, before coming here, we also have our own image, the one image, which is New York City or big city, like tall buildings, lots of lights, lots of shops, lots of cars. But obviously, it's not like that. It's America has those things, but also has other things too. So it's interesting when you think about it that way. It goes both ways.
It does, because you told your story about when you were coming, you thought you were going to see big shiny lights. And that's what I thought. Technically, I did see the big shiny lights.
Yeah.
My layover was in New York. How
Oh,
from New York coming to Lexington, like you said, it changed. It was very different. So yeah, like you said, there is that danger of a single story, even like in America, because I feel like growing up, even though yes, reading books it broadened my horizon of what America is, because I actually knew about Kentucky before I moved to
oh,
Kentucky. However, all the movies I watched were all California, New York, maybe a little bit of Chicago, maybe some Atlanta, and that was it. And that was what was mostly ingrained in me of how America was. So I feel like we did have the same or similar experience when it
yeah.
came to expecting something, expecting this amazing, maybe Empire State Building.
And yeah, yeah. So we were in for a shock. Yeah, the landing on Lexington. So even on, I guess first of all, thank you for your work that you do on both sides. I think it's very important work that we are able to tell stories. Because if we as Africans don't tell the story, then nobody will. So thank you for the work there. So on your entrepreneurship journey, I'm just curious what prompted you to take this route. Obviously, it's easier to graduate from college, get a job at a corporate firm set up and just work your way up. That's the route I took. So I'm always amazed when I see people who have the wherewithal to take that risk of I'm going to go on something, I'm going to bet on myself and start a business. Obviously, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So I'm always curious what motivated you, what gave you that confidence that I'm going to do this and it's going to work.
I'm going to start this off by saying that working in corporates, there is nothing wrong with it. In life, we're all different. So what works for one person might not work for the other person. And I did work in corporates for 2.5 years, roughly. And working in corporate was actually what helped help me financially be able to even say I am going to quit my job and go into entrepreneurship. Now, what gave me that, I guess, audacity to do it? I think I've always known. My dad was a businessman. My brother has his architectural firm. My sister also has her business. So yes, my house, my mom she's a lecturer, she's a PhD holder. So she did the whole thing of maybe getting into academia or getting into corporate and working your way up. But I saw both sides growing up. And I always knew as a child that corporate was not for me. I remember then I used to say to my mom, I'm like, nah. You wake up early at 6 in the morning and you run out. And it scared me so much. I think it not only scared me, but it also scarred me because I feel like even though business is harder, the time and the leverage it gives you, it was quite appealing to me. Now, as I said, I knew ever since I was young. So at 8, I actually started my first business. I was selling cards to kids.
At school?
Yes, in
Oh,
school, yeah. I was in primary 3 and I was selling, even though I studied computer science, I'm a very creative person. So, like writing, anything that has to, just anything that has to do with creativity, count me in, I'm there. When I was a child, I used to make cards. Like, I would have like cardboard papers because my brother is an architect. So, he would have like leftovers of all of these things. And I used to help him with his architectural stuff, his inking, and all of those things. I even built, I modeled the house. I would take this cardboards and I would design like a card, like birthday card or whatever card, and I would sell it to kids for 10 naira and they would buy it. So I did that when I was like 7, 8. And then when I was 10, I and my sister, I'm guessing you're familiar with recharge cards.
oh yeah.
I opened up like a business of selling recharge cards. Like we put a sign on the gate in our house, buy your recharge cards here. So we will buy the cards for 10 naira. And then, so naira and 14 naira for a bundle. I think it was like 10 in a bundle. Those cards, it was like 100 naira MTN cards. The ones of 100 naira, we sell it for 110. So you were getting roughly like maybe $140 roughly profit. So I and my sister, we did that for a little while. Then when I was roughly 15, 14, 15, I and my friend, we opened a pastry business. We were basically selling chin chin. And we
It's a
would
snack. How would you describe for someone who has no idea what chin chin is? It's a snack. Let's
back,
just say it's a
yes.
snack. It's kind of not like I was gonna say chips. It's not like chips. It'll be like I'm trying to think what's closest to it. But anyways, we can move on. So yeah, so chin chin is a West African or a Nigerian snack.
Yes. So I was me and my friend, we were actually baking the chin chin. We would go in for markets, ask them, hey, do you guys have anyone supplying you with chin chin? They would say yes. We would go to other shops, other stores. Some of them bought it, some of them did not buy it. But that's something that I had already started doing. And then by the time I came to the States, doing things digitally was more the norm. So that was when I started my first blog, Daily Chronicles, and that didn't quite work out, but it paved the way for other things that
Yeah.
I am doing.
Sounds like you've always had it in your blood. I want to try to tie it to the topic of self doubt. So through all your journey so far, growing up in Nigeria, college, and now starting your business, does any moment come to mind where you were trying to, whether it's a new project or something where you were trying to do that you had to overcome some self doubt?
I can't think of one moment exactly, but I know that self doubt is also something that I've had to navigate. Because the thing is, as you build confidence over time, but you're human and there are still times you would doubt if what you're doing is going to work or if it's correct. Honestly, I'm just going to come out right and say it. First, it's my therapist. My therapist is amazing. She's helped me deal with a lot of things, a lot of issues. And one thing, whenever I have self doubt, there's something she keeps going back to. She said, do you remember that little girl coming from Nigeria and how she was able to conquer her fears and come from Nigeria and move to the US? Look at that little girl now. Look at you now. So it basically, if you could do that as a teenager, flew over Atlantic Ocean, you got in a plane by yourself, you got in a different country by yourself, a different city. What is it that you cannot do? That's one of the things that helped me. And my coach too, Dr. Gayatri, shout out to you. You are amazing. She is also someone that has helped me navigate self-doubts, and we've been working together for a year. She always lets me know, hey, you're doing amazing. So that's another, because sometimes it just goes around. I'm like, yeah, I don't know if this is gonna work out. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this. And we sit down and we break it down. So she helps me too. Another thing is I am sure I'm religious. I believe in God. I trust God. I don't think I'll be where I am right now without him. So that is also another go-to for me. When in doubt, pray. When scared, pray. When happy, pray. So that is also one of the ways I deal with self-doubt. Sometimes I'm just like, I feel like I gaslight God. Somehow I'm just like, God, if you don't help me with this thing, they'll laugh at you. I'm your child. You have to
Funny.
help me out. That's also a way I deal with that. And I'll say the last way is my family, because like I mentioned earlier, we're a very close, tight knit family. My brother, he has been in business for, I want to say at least 15 years, maybe more. I've gone to him a couple of times to ask, how are you dealing with this? How do you deal with this when your employee is doing this? How do you fix it? That's also somebody that has helped me. He and my mom has also been a very instrumental part of just helping me with self doubt and stuff.
Those are very helpful strategies. Yeah, one of the things that came up, the biggest one for me, just listen to you, is just having someone in your corner, whether it's your therapist, you mentioned a coach. In my case, I had an episode of the show where I went through my own story, and actually a professor from Brea actually was that person for me in terms of one of my key moments where I got out of my shell. It was a professor. She's no longer with us. She passed away, but it was a presentation that we were going to give in multiple places. So we would have to like practice every time before we get ready to go give a presentation. And yeah, she kept pushing me and pushing me. At that time, I didn't know the benefit of it, but looking back, she was very instrumental in getting me out of my shell. So for people listening out there, one of the strategy is to find someone who could support you, someone who could be there for you during the ups and the downs and the tough times and the happy times. And for some, religion is that thing that's always there, whether it's tough or whether it's happy or it's sunny. This is all great advice. My last question before we wrap up: imposter syndrome. What are your thoughts on imposter syndrome?
Ooh, this is a good one. Because the thing is, I feel like we all deal with imposter syndrome. At least, let me speak for myself. I have dealt with it. But I think one thing that can help is how you show up. If you show up very prepared, this is what has worked. A lot of times when I show up very prepared, even if I am or I have been feeling the imposter syndrome, I know, no, I got this in the bag. I'm prepared. I can give this talk. It's like when you take an exam, right? Think about this. You're taking an exam and you're not ready. You didn't study. When you get into the hall, you are going to feel like crap. But then if you studied, you get into the hall, you're like, oh, yeah, this is A, this is B, this is C. So I think that dealing with imposter syndrome, one of the ways I would suggest is showing up prepared and also knowing that it's something everyone deals with. I think that whole thing of fake you make it is actually true. I feel like we all deal with some sort of imposter syndrome, but it's also about showing up with that confidence and knowing that, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Yeah, I actually got this. And then you take it away.
That's awesome advice. So the key here, people, is then preparation. You plan, and personally, when I'm getting ready for something big, and you have all these different ideas. What if I stumble? And say it's a presentation, for example. What if I stumble my words, or maybe there's some technical difficulties happen, and then the clicker isn't working? And I try to actually write out those things, or think about those individual things that could go wrong that's bothering me, and try to find answers to them. So, okay, maybe I could forget something, so I can practice and cover that, or maybe it's the tech. Then I try to see, okay, is there a backup version of this? Do I have printouts? Maybe I have a hard copy to overcome that if the technology isn't working. But I agree. I think it all comes down again to preparation. And hopefully, by the time you step into that room to make that presentation, you believe enough in yourself. Hey, I have this in the bag, as you said. I've done the work, and now it's just to deliver. And also, from my experience too, I think it's a big difference when I'm thinking about myself. Okay, what am I presenting and thinking about my materials? How do I present that? And making sure the people who are in the room are going to get that message as opposed to thinking about what the people in the room are thinking about me. That's when it goes like downhill. When I start like focusing on the people, especially when, and sometimes you can't help it though. Like when it's like very senior people,
Yeah.
like you want to make a very good impression, and especially people who you don't get to talk to or present to like very often. Or it could be an investor, maybe like someone like you have a business and there's an amazing investor that you think, oh my God, like it would be great if I can get this guy or girl on board. I don't want to mess this up. So then it's a lot of pressure, and then you're thinking about him or her and not about yourself. And that's just, I guess, in my experience, that's just not being a recipe for success when you focus on the people and not yourself and controlling what you can control. This has been an amazing conversation, Mazzy. So thank you for your time. Before we leave, why don't you tell the good people how to connect with you or find you?
Yes, I am mainly on LinkedIn, and that's my full name. That's Nmasichi space CHUKWUEMEKA. I also have a newsletter called Nmasi Chronicles, which where I talk about my life, talk about how my business is going, talk about the ups and downs within my diary. So you can also subscribe there. But you can also check us out on Tribes and History. That's tribesandhistory.com. And we're Tribes and History everywhere. Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever, name it.
Awesome. We'd also include links to your websites on the show notes.
Okay.
So thank you again. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time and for you sharing your journey and your insights on everything you've learned along the way. And for those listening and to everyone tuning in, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to Unmuted Moments on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And as always, you can email me directly for any feedback at unmutedmoments@gmail.com. So thanks for listening. I'm Nmasi, and I'll see you next time. Until then, stay unmuted.